Here is Ilhan Omar. She was, we'll start with her, calling on the White House to cancel student debt by executive action. And the response, and I believe this is the way the sequencing was, that Ilhan Omar and Warren and Schumer, right, were at a press conference, I believe. Is this?
Yeah, and Ayanna Pressley too.
And Ayanna Pressley calling for the cancellation of student debt, $50,000. Here is Ilhan Omar.
Millions of Americans can't afford to put food on the table and feed their families. Millions can't pay rent and face housing insecurity. Millions lost their jobs during the pandemic and can't afford basic necessities. The last thing people should be worried about is their student debt. Nearly 45 million Americans are shackled with student loan debt, and the amount of debt the average student carries continues to rise. We know that student debt is not a result of bad decisions or behavior. It is the result of a broken system that tells students to get an education or go to college in order to have a stable life, but then does not provide the resources to afford that education. It is the result of a two-tiered system, one for the rich families who can afford tens of thousands of dollars for higher education, and another for the poor and the middle class who have to pay off that education for the rest of their lives. I always say America does not suffer from scarcity, we suffer from greed. We can choose to lift the burden of millions of people face. We can actually invest in the future of the American people. Today, we are taking a needed action to tackle the student loan debt crisis by using executive authority under the Higher Education Act to cancel up to $50,000 in student debt for federal loan borrowers.
She mentions executive authority there, which is quite key.
Right. This is Joe Biden has the ability, just as on day one, he signed a moratorium on payments for federal student loans. That same authority allows him to say, this moratorium, permanent. You don't need to pay anymore. We forgive X amount of dollars, $50,000, whatever.
And no one can reverse that. You know, say Biden loses to, or the Democratic nominee in 2024 loses to Josh Hawley or, you know, Tucker Carlson in 2024. You can't.
Those loans don't come back.
Uncancel student debt.
Here is, I mean, so you're, and just as a stimulative impact, I mean, the impact from a stimulative base, I mean, it's just, what a, no better time to do it too than right now. And again, the point that she was making is really important. There is this sense, because you're talking about people who went to college, and they haven't necessarily graduated. In fact, much of that, a ton of that student debt is a function of not graduating. And remember, we also know that like half of it is just interest. And
part of the sorry. Go on.
Just that the point that she makes is that wealthy people don't have this debt to begin with. And if you're concerned about, like, wait a second, why are we forgiving the debt of someone who's going to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatnot? You are forgiving the debt, but if you want to means test it in that respect, there's an easy process to do it. And Digby talked about this means process, the means testing that you can do as well for the $2,000 check. It is called taxation. And if you are worried about wealthy people getting too much of a benefit from our society, And when we're talking about wealthy people, we're obviously not talking about the millionaires and billionaires. But if we're talking about wealthy people, there's a very easy way to deal with that. And that is increase the marginal tax rate in those areas and you claw that money back. We have a system to do it. It's the most efficient system in which you could means test that if you really are concerned about means testing it. Simply, it's called taxation. And that was one of the important points I think she was making, addressing that notion. This debt is not held by wealthy people.
Yeah, that's meant to deflect by people who want those interest rates to still be moneymakers. And it includes the federal government, who's the number one beneficiary of this, which is a sick part.
I think it goes beyond that, too. I think it is, there are interests out there that will not necessarily gain money from this, but there's a fear amongst these people that if you forgive student debt, that society, that you create a moral hazard, that you are establishing this notion that debt jubilees can happen, that the U.S. government can afford these things. I think that, that impetus and drive, I think we overlook often. Like last night in the vote-a-rama, there was a bill that Manchin voted for, an amendment. It passed that the Republicans to tell Joe Biden to reverse the Keystone XL permit revocation. He shut down the Keystone XL. Now, it does not have the force of law. He doesn't have to do it. Now, why did Manchin vote for that? Because it's like they're voting on the principle that we should just have more carbon. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not even like a direct result. It's just like it's the principle of it.
Well, and the thing is that, well, just back to the student debt thing, like Biden seems to subscribe to that. I mean, he could have done this on day one, and he is getting pressured by the Senate majority leader of his own party.
Yep.
And he still doesn't seem to want to do this by executive action, which is unconscionable. Unconscionable.
Biden has been like sort of has been seasoned so long in that sort of credit card bill that he comes out of in Delaware, that like the idea of anybody not getting paying off loans is I think just an anathema. It's just impossible to him to even perceive on some level. But here is Joe Biden's response via his spokesperson. He is still holding out. He has been marinated in this world of debt and through the credit card companies and the idea of forgiving, and he can forgive up to 90% of all student loans in the country if he wanted, because they're 90% of them are federal. Here he is, or she is.
The president has and continues to support canceling $10,000 of federal student loan debt per person as a response to the COVID crisis. He's calling on Congress to draft the proposal, and if it is passed and sent to his desk, he will look forward to signing it. Debt relief is, of course, an important priority for the president. On day one, the first day of his administration, he directed the Department of Education to extend the existing pause on student loan payments and interest for millions of Americans with federal student loans. That was a step he took through executive action, but he certainly supports efforts by members in Congress to take additional steps, and he would look forward to signing it.
Yeah, no.
Do that through legislation and not an EO, not an executive order.
Well, I think he took the step, already took a step through an executive action on the first day, and he would look to Congress to take the next steps.
Why though? Why
Exactly. There is
that is outrageous. I'm sorry.
There is no logical response to the question of why. Why does this have to be if you were able to take that first step and you believe, and I think it should be more, but if he believes on his own terms, $10,000 of debt relief per person would be a good thing. You've already established you have the power to do it. Why? What is the rationale of making it go through Congress? What is the rationale?
Well, it's this sickness that Biden seems to have had for 40 years at this point that, again, fetishizes bipartisanship, Also, he comes from Delaware and was as beholden to credit card companies as anybody has been. And three, it's this idea that he gets himself to believe on issues that don't personally resonate with him or aren't central to the Democratic Party and doesn't threaten power in the same instance, that it needs to be done in a bipartisan fashion. But other things he's fine with doing. He's fine with taking executive action. There's nothing going to be done
in a bipartisan fashion.
There's nothing.
Like, I mean, like, they'll pass it in reconciliation, and so it's not a bipartisan thing. It's And then the other argument is like, well, wait a second. If you're not going to, the idea that like, well, if you're going to leave it up to Congress to pass, why wouldn't it be the $50,000? Like, why wouldn't you say, if you know that you can do it, and you say like, but this is up to Congress, then if you're going to defer to Congress, then defer to them on the number too.
Absolutely. But that's, again, I think it brings it back to what you're saying. The interests of banks and credit card companies has been so central to his political life that he cannot fathom it anyway. I mean, and it's the same reason he's open to negotiating the income thresholds for these $1,400 checks, because, he also, there's a separate reason. He's obsessed with that idea. He's obsessed with the mythology of the Senate and the coming together. And,
I think he just wants to make it I think it is this notion of debt is sacrosanct. And if you're going to relieve any of it, it must be done. There must be like it literally must be like, like the Hunger Games for this idea of debt relief to pass through. We need to have like 12 perfect storms, and it must overcome these obstacles, because to relieve people of debt like this is such a dramatic, once in a lifetime type of situation. I mean, I think this is their, on some level, it is like a religious article of faith that you do not allow people to get out of debt. Remember, this is a guy with the bankruptcy bill. And
ironically, Warren is on the other side, pushing him to do this by executive action, renewing that old rivalry that she put aside.
I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's ironic or maybe
full circle,
totally full circle. And I do think that like it's not even like this specific debt. Shannon Moore, who I don't know if she still does. I think she does radio up in Alaska. I don't know if she still does. She was a big activist in the Pebble Mine fight, which I think is now over. I think they're trying to revive it, which is a mining company was trying to dig at the mouth, and I can't remember of Bristol Bay. I think it was. And Bristol Bay is like the number one place that we get our fish from in the country. Like some massive percentage of our salmon come from Bristol Bay. And it was quite obviously really dangerous to have a mine so close to Bristol Bay. Like, you would destroy the huge swath of the economy in Alaska if something horrible happened and the fish started incapable of living there. And she had done a lot of research and was meeting with the lawyers and had like determined that like it's not even that profitable for them. And the downside risk was so huge. And she met with them, and she's convinced that she had the best argument as to why they should pack up and leave from this area. And the lawyer said to her, like, you don't get it. We don't care about Pebble Mine. We care about the other mines. And if we allow the EPA to win this one, they get a better chance of winning the others. And then it was just like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
This isn't like this is not about this battle. This is about like every future war that one could hypothesize about. And I think that's what this is about with the student debt. I think it's less about like, you don't hear anybody say like, this is too expensive for the country, or it is about this idea that we do not want elements of the American public to have the expectation that you can get out of debt. And let's be clear, there are massive cohorts of people. One was just our president, who are quite aware that you can get out of debt. that you can get debt discharged. It's called bankruptcy. And there's been
this
a
is
long tradition in this country.
This is a part of what, the same leg of the Greenspan ideology of maintaining a small amount of job insecurity, or whatever he said, right? You can't allow people to believe that their debt can be canceled, because then the American people and students might feel secure and might be financially okay. And so, I mean, like, we can break down why Joe Biden feels this way. Doesn't make it any less
right
immoral.
Yep.
Mike Conzel, in his book, I was listening to it, goes back to Malthus, and everyone knows Malthus for getting the population thing wrong. But another thing that he thought was that hunger is a great way to keep people ordered silently, and I think that's a line of thinking that exists in our ruling class. Like, they verbalized it back then, but when have we stopped acting like we need to keep people like in order like that?
I mean, go get. I keep referencing it. I don't know why this week I've referenced this like 4 times. That Greenspan clip. Just Google it. You'll find it. Greenspan in front of the Senate Finance Committee, I think in the 80s. I can't remember when it was from. Greenspan was the chair of the Fed. He oversaw really the financial crisis in many respects. The crisis, not the recovery. And he was testifying in front of Senate that part of his job, part of the Fed's job, was to maintain anxiety amongst the workforce. Will you look for that, Matt? It was
looking for it now.
His way of saying, we need to make sure that nobody's too comfortable, because then they may not come and apply for your crap ass job.
Also, what would pharma do? Because they're treating that anxiety.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bunch of knockoff benefits.
Matt, that
to
was
it,
base.
of course,
Right.
right? I mean, there's a bunch of knockoff benefits to it. But the primary one being, like, if we don't maintain a certain amount of job insecurity or of tension in that marketplace, we're going to have to do a lot more pulling people into our doors to get them to apply than forces out there pushing them in.
Yeah.
And when they're pushed in, we've got more leverage than they do.
As we wait, I just wanted to say this because it's like, I think this is a notable death, that Christopher Plummer passed away today. Did you see that?
Oh, I didn't see that.
91 years old. One of the great actors who was still doing really meaningful work up until his death. Knives Out, obviously, very notably, most recently. Just, I mean, I loved.
Oh, that's a good movie.
Loved, yeah, and I love The Sound of Music so much. So, Christopher Plummer, rest in peace.
I'm not super familiar with this clip, but maybe someone will at me with it, or I'll find it.
Okay, we'll find it. We'll play it later at another time.
And I'm down to talk about. I don't know if you're interested in talking about this Burma thing, Sam, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Gary.
Let's. Where do we have that? Do we have a clip on that?
I think we have the clip of Biden calling it a coup, which does have implications.
Yeah.
That's in Sound Polls.
Okay.
Where is it?
All right. So I'll just intro it.
Okay, go
ahead. There was a military coup in Burma. We touched on it in the fun half yesterday. And Biden recognized it as a coup yesterday, gave a speech on foreign policy that included, I believe it was the same speech, ostensibly ending much of our support for the genocide in Yemen, and he also touched on the coup in Burma.
And why did you call it Burma as opposed to Myanmar?
Well, I mean, that's what I've heard is what people prefer it to be called.
Is that right? I always thought it was the opposite.
I was teeing up the clip, which is why I did that awkward pause. But we may
do
not
you have the clip,
it.
Brendan? I have it too.
Yeah, no, I don't have it.
All right. Well, it doesn't really matter because Biden called it. Okay, there we go.
Over the past few days, we've been in close cooperation with our allies and partners to bring together the international community to address the military coup in Burma. I've also been in touch with Leader McConnell to discuss our shared concerns about the situation in Burma, and we are united in our resolve. There can be no doubt in a democracy, force should never seek to overrule the will of the people or attempt to erase the outcome of a credible election. The Burmese military should relinquish power they have seized, release the advocates and activists and officials they have detained, lift the restrictions on telecommunications, and refrain from violence. As I said earlier this week, we will work with our partners to support restoration of democracy and the rule of law and impose consequences on those responsible.
So, I mean, calling it a coup means that basically the aid that we send there is no longer going to go. So it's not that much. It's some hundreds of millions of dollars. But what's really interesting is that the Biden administration is still now recognizing for some reason Guaido, who isn't even calling himself the leader of Venezuela, as the leader. But then we call what happened in Myanmar/Burma a coup because Aung San Suu Kyi's party won, I think, 80% of the 80%. Parliamentary seats. And so then the military was claiming, oh, this is election fraud, taking some cues from what happened on January 6th in the United States. And they basically took her and the president captive and took over the government there. And it's also a really tragic arc for Aung San Suu Kyi because she was once this activist, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 91, I believe, and was really oppositional to the military. And once she got into power as the de facto leader, she started to work with them and tried to, and then they eventually ended up ousting her. So, you know, you can't really appease these far right-wing elements. But of course, also she presided over a genocide, many people call it, at the very least, extreme persecution of Rohingya Muslims. But the issue is that the military is even more anti-Muslim than her as well. So, I mean, I just thought it was important to touch on that because that's an insanely consequential event that's happening across the globe, and also the hypocrisy of the Biden administration's response to it. Because one thing's a coup, we recognize one leader, we don't recognize the other. But these contradictions are obviously a huge part of the way our government operates.
I mean, they can't possibly think. Well, yes, they can't possibly think Guaido is going to take. I think it's just really just a way of them just saying, like, you know, we're just being dicks and try and keep. I don't know. That is it's stunning to me. All right, let's move on to some other clips. Get some of these up. We don't have much time here.
Clips.
Couple of clips. These are too funny.